All right, we'll get live in 3, 2, 1. Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is McKaylee. I work at Tattered Cover Bookstore. And first and foremost, I want to say thank you. Thank you for shopping locally. Thank you for supporting local independent bookstores. It means the world to us. We would not be here without the support of our communities, both locally and virtually. It means so much to us. We wouldn't have gotten through the last year, the last 50 years without you, because that's right, it is Tattered Cover's 50th anniversary, and we in 2021, which is quite an amazing feat for a bookstore, and we owe that success, or at least a very, very large part of it, to you. So thank you so much for that. Before I go any farther, I want to let you know that closed captioning is enabled on this video should you want it or need it. There's a black bar at the bottom of the screen with a button labeled CC on it. If you click that button, closed captioning is enabled should you want it or need it. And a little bit about Tattered Cover Bookstore. For those who may be joining us outside of the Denver metro area, we're located in Colorado, and we now have 5 locations, which is amazing. Our Stanley Marketplace location just opened up, which is a children's location with everything from YA, middle grade, picture book, board books. We're so excited to have that new store open. And you can come and visit our stores if you'd like, or shop online at tatteredcover.com for all of your bookish needs. And you can follow us on social media as well. We have so many events coming up, tatteredcover.com/event. Oh my gosh, so many. But this one's one of my favorites. For those of you who've been on here and watching for a long time or have seen me in the store, YA is where my heart is. And I love being able to celebrate these releases, even in a virtual manner. It means so much to us. And Tattered Cover is a huge component of YA lovers as well, with our Teen Book Con, which maybe will happen later this year. We'll see. We're working on it. But for now, I want to talk about Darcy Woods' newest novel, Smoke, which is perfect for Colorado audiences. We're going to talk all about it with her and Amy Spalding, and a little bit about our YA authors here tonight, which if you don't know them, you should. But Amy Spalding is the author of several novels for teens, including Kissing Ted Callahan and Other Guys, and The Summer of Jordy Perez, and The Best Burger in Los Angeles, which earned a starred review from Kirkus, and she lives in Los Angeles. And her newest book, which is not mentioned there, is also there. And I'm now blanking on it now that I've just realized that that's not in her bio. We're going to mention it.
Friends.
Of course. Thank you. I was like, what the heck? Why is that not on there? But we used to be friends. That's definitely, you need to read that one as well. And then we also have Darcy Woods. Award-winning young adult author Darcy Woods has held an eclectic mix of professions, from refueling helicopters in the U.S. Army to recharging bodies and spirits at a spa. And her most beloved career, is being an author. She lives in Michigan with her husband and 2 tuxedo cats who overdress for everything. Summer of Supernova is her double Rita-nominated debut novel, and Smoke is her second novel, which is what we're celebrating here today. And I'm going to go ahead and turn the camera around so we can see our guests here this evening. Hi, all. It's so good to see you both.
Hi. So great to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us in a virtual manner. You know, we really appreciate it, and being able to reach out to our teen audiences and our adults who love YA audiences. Like I said, in the virtual sphere for us, this is awesome. We're so excited to have 2 wonderful authors here tonight.
Thank you so much. Again, just so thrilled to be here, and thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what I'm going to do is I want to remind our audience that those of you in the chat right now, you can ask questions along the way. We're going to have a Q&A session after Darcy and Amy talk about Smoke and writing and other things. I'm so sure it's going to be a fun night. And for now, I will let you 2 take the stage. I'll be back in a bit.
Woo.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the Tattered Cover, an amazing bookstore. If you have not been there here in Colorado, you should definitely check them out. Darcy, we're so excited. By we, I mean all of us here. Like,
thank you.
Because of the way the Zoom is set up, but I assume it's just many excited people. So excited to celebrate Smoke with you tonight.
Thank you. I'm excited to celebrate. It's so fun. I've been chomping at the bit to be able to talk about this book, because I know just based on the cover alone, there's a lot of questions and conversations to be had.
Awesome. So obviously, I'm sure a lot of people watching tonight are your friends and family. They know about this book, but I'm sure there are also people watching who do not know about this book, who've not read it yet, who maybe are thinking about it. So what's your like quick pitch on this book? What it's, what's it about?
Then
We'll get into it. This is just sort of like, so that if people who have not read it yet are like, what are they going to talk about? Here's what we're going to talk about. It's this book.
Okay. Well, it's funny because I actually did a Zoom launch with Kathleen Glasgow, and she had kind of referenced the book as, and this is the shortest, most condensed pitch, is Breaking Bad meets Weeds, but for a young adult. And at which point I was like, oh, so like Breaking Bud would be kind of the combination of those things. But really, I think this novel is about exploring the lengths that we'll go to for the people that we love. And it really looks at what happens when a girl who's never crossed a line crosses them all by secretly growing and selling a bumper crop of marijuana to save her family from bankruptcy. And it all goes to pot from there. So
yeah,
that is the quick pitch.
Literally and figuratively.
Yes. There's a lot of puns to be had with this book, and I tend to have a blast with it. So anybody that does request any sort of personalized copies, I have a ball with that.
I feel like getting a personalized pun from an author is like a bonus gift. So, everyone, you should find a way to get a personalized copy from Darcy, because like trust me, you do not get that from most authors.
Well, and I will tell you too, if you order through Tattered and can have them send it to me, I would be happy to then ship it back to you signed. So
well, here's what you should do. I'm going to save everyone a lot of shipping and hassle.
Please do.
Blank book plates, which you could also just get large stickers that are matte. And then you make them out to Tattered. Yes. So Tattered cover can tell you.
Trying to get it.
Goes to Tattered cover. Exactly. You don't have to be sending books back and forth. That's just too stressful.
I know. It's just hard to fit a whole lot on there, but I can write very small. So
this is why I am maybe suggesting getting a larger one so that you can fit. But we're not here to talk about puns. We're here to talk about his tuxedo cats, because I didn't know you had tuxedo cats. I also
two
have
fatties.
Tuxedo cat. What are your cats' names?
Bojangles and Cedo. And actually they were feral, and Bojangles had her kittens when I was on deadline for Summer of Supernovas. It was the night of my deadline, and she had the kittens under my bed. So that was very interesting. It was like a crime scene.
Really high, like that's really dramatic.
It was like, so dramatic. It was very, talk about high stakes.
Rescue. No, there was no drama involved. He was not feral. A soft little baby.
Well, that's
so anyway,
nice.
Actually, we're not here to talk about puns or cats, even though those are two topics that I love. Here to talk about smoke. So normally, I feel like the question many authors dread is like, well, where'd you get your ideas? What is your inspiration for this? But I actually think you really like talking about this for this book specifically. So I would love to hear from you where this idea came from, because it's not, first of all, that super condensed pitch is perfect, but this book is interesting because it's a coming of age story. It's a family drama. It's a thriller. It's a mystery. Like there's a lot going on. And
yeah.
So I can see why it's exciting for you to want to share of like, how did these pieces come together? Because it's not simply about one thing.
No, it's really not. So it's interesting with my first book, and I've talked about this before. You hear that age old sort of expression and advice for authors that write what you know. With my first book, I really didn't know much about astrology, but I've always been so fascinated with metaphysical stuff. So I wanted to learn more. And that was part of the impetus for wanting to write that book. But for Smoke, it was very different. I actually did think about what do I know? And I kind of zeroed in on some key pieces of my own personal story that could lend itself to a novel that would be quite different. And that is that, I grew up as the daughter of a war veteran with severe PTSD. My father was in the Vietnam War. And this is before PTSD was even something that was diagnosed or talked about a whole lot. And so I also grew up in a grow house because that was part of how my dad actually was able to function after all of that. So for me, it's interesting because the marijuana discussion is a very different one because it was so normalized in my environment. And honestly, like I was watching so many people around me dying of smoking cigarettes and alcohol. My grandmother passed away of that. And so here I'm so confused, even growing up as a kid, not understanding why is this particular thing, why is pot a bad thing? So that was kind of, that backstory with that. And then also, so I know the PTSD, and then my own personal experience as a veteran in the military, and having experienced the ASD, which is something that happens, the acute stress order, which is sort of a temporary form of PTSD. And that was something that I experienced during my time in the military. So many of the scenes that are more visceral, they're not necessarily exact representations of my dad or myself, but it's very much what it felt like to sort of be in these situations and feel so out of control. And especially watching a loved one where you feel very powerless to help them and not knowing how. And so also that whole like tendency to be a perfectionist and want to not rock the boat and make it as easy as possible. Like so much of that is trying to control the uncontrollable and find, that just trying to find your balance and all that.
So obviously a lot of this does come from your personal experience.
Yes.
But so did that mean you actually, I don't know, do you like researching for books, or is that like stressful to you? I get very stressed about research.
I think it depends. Like I actually was looking at I started like dabbling in a historical that I find a bit daunting and overwhelming, but because of growing up the way that I did and being able to just go over to my dad's house and be like, hey, can you show me like what this setup looks like in the basement? Like I already know what it looks like in the basement. Like, so I had a unique advantage to that. I don't know. I can say with honesty, like I probably wouldn't have attempted a book like this if I didn't have my own backstory that I have, because I feel like these pieces are so critical to get right. The representation of the PTSD, the marijuana, like just all of it. And for me with the PTSD, it's also so important to be respectful in the representation of that. And I wanted to really show that there is strength even when somebody is struggling with something so big.
Yeah, it feels like the right amount of research to be like, I'm going to make sure I get these things correct, but also they're coming from somewhere super personal. You're not just like, I wonder what it would be like for someone to go through. It's like, no, you have firsthand experience seeing what it was like for someone to go through these things.
Yeah. And the other thing too, that's funny, like I talk about, and I say that it took 3 years to write this book, but I think I had emailed you and I said, I actually stumbled across this paper from high school, if you can believe it. It was an argumentative paper I wrote. This is before computers, you guys. I mean, there were really computers, but like,
Darcy,
what's that?
You have really good penmanship.
It's still kind of the same. But interestingly, it was an argumentative paper I wrote about that was for the legalization of marijuana. And it talked about the environmental factors, the issues with criminal justice and how that was treated within it. And just so many different things in terms of making things safer when it can be regulated. And so it's funny that this paper is 30 years old. I've totally dated myself now, but it's 30 years old. And all the reasons that we're seeing it now begin to become more accepted and legalized for medical reasons and other reasons is, exactly the things that I had talked about in the paper. So it's kind of interesting to see it come full circle like that.
I'm curious, and you know what, I said, is there anything you don't want to talk about? And you said no. So I feel like I'm allowed to ask whatever.
You are. Go for it.
Did you feel, was it tricky selling a book for young adult that dealt with weed in a way that wasn't super like preachy, or like we all have to learn a lesson about drugs? Because I love the young adult genre, obviously. Mm-hmm. It's the main thing I do, and yet sometimes I think we want such clean lines to make sure we're teaching good lessons that I think things can be fuzzier. And I think this is one of the topics sometimes that I'm like, well, yeah, you're overusing, you're smoking up all the time as a teen. It's not great for your brain. Studies have shown this. But if you're doing it a little, I'd so much rather you do that than get really drunk all the time. And, you know, there's a lot of, I feel like people get real panicky about drug use. And I mean, I grew up very much the opposite of you, where all I heard was that like pot was just like the worst thing you could do. And it was a, you know, a gateway drug. And soon you're going to be doing acid and jumping off buildings if you, you know, smoke pot. And then I became an adult who was in California, and I obviously have a very different relationship now with it as a, you know, just an idea and as an actual thing. And so but I know that some people are still kind of in that place with it, or at least feeling like for the children, we have to make sure we talk that way. So like,
well, and that was part of what was
I mean, I would just love, first of all, your idea of like, you sat down and decided, I want to write about this for teens.
Yeah.
Then you had to like deal with the world once you did it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's part of why it took, I think, 3 years to write this book, was to find a way. So I did want there to be a certain amount of moral ambiguity where we take a character who would be categorized as a good girl. Like I talk about these different labels, a good girl doing the wrong thing for the right reasons, because I feel like more and more in the world, we're seeing these shades of gray. And so for me, it was so important to not insert myself into like, these are my beliefs, this is how you should believe, all of that. But the thing is, like, just like with sex, with drinking, with anything, if we can't explore it in fiction, I mean, these are things that are in the world and that teens are exposed to. So I just feel so passionately that it is so important to introduce a topic like this, particularly when, as we see legalization happen more and more, you have entire sections of stores, you know, of gardening stores and things that are now devoted to marijuana. So to me, it feels more irresponsible not to explore these conversations and not to talk about these things. And I do think I was very careful in how I wanted to handle it. I use it like the father uses it partly to treat his PTSD. There are some characters that use it recreationally. The main character does not, and that's by virtue of her personality and who she is. And so much of it also boils down to the characters themselves and what drives them into making the choices they make, whether that is to smoke pot or to not smoke pot. So really, I kept the emphasis more on those motives and what was really driving that. And the story is actually divided into the growth cycle of cannabis. And so it's divided into 5 parts. And I really enjoyed that as well, with being able to sort of talk about this in the context of the character's own growth. So as we see the seed happen, that's kind of when she's realizing, oh gosh, there's major problems in my family. What am I going to do? I feel like I'm the only one who's equipped to handle this, because dad's dealing with what he's dealing with. My brother is just kind of a slacker, fun, good time guy. So, you know, she's sort of carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders, and that's the impetus. And she loves growing. She loves the greenhouse. So for me too, that was another key sort of point to her personality, where it was something that was organic and a natural extension of who she already was. So it's not sensationalized. It's not glorified in that way. It's very much a function of, you know, where she's trying to go.
No, in a lot of ways, the book is not about marijuana at all. Like, it's about family and obligations, both real and maybe perceived obligations. And, you know, like you said, like what will we do to help someone we knew needed the help?
Yeah.
So it happens to be marijuana in your book, but that's not, despite the title, despite all the things about it, that's not the point of the book, obviously.
Right. And smoke was really meant to be like, I chose that. All of my titles I tend to use, like, I like them to be multifunctioning. So smoke is also this idea of, you know, people are not always who they appear to be, but not only that, we don't always know who we are as people until we are forced into a situation where we have to make some really hard decisions. And that's really when I feel like you see the mettle of a person. And for the main character, Honor, she really has to be pushed to the brink of, you know, how far would I go for my family? And it's when she lets go the rules and of those things, that she truly steps into who she really is.
Well, and also it's that time of life. Like obviously
Yep.
she's going through a more dramatic situation than everyone goes through. But I, I like to think that when you're around, you're 16, you're 17, you're seeing it's often when you're sort of seeing your parents as humans for the first time.
Yes. And their flaws and
It not for, I mean, for some people they may confront this sooner, but I think when you're getting close to the end of high school, when you're looking at colleges, when you're thinking about your future, sometimes it's when your family's financial situation becomes clearer, what they can provide for you, what they can't, what you may worry you have to provide for them yourself someday. Yeah. So it's sort of, I mean, obviously your book is a dramatic version of those things that a lot of teens go through, but I think a lot of teens go through this in a smaller way constantly.
Yes. I absolutely agree. And I think, I mean, it is so much about just coming into your own and finding your way through the world and what that looks like as it relates to your family, but also yourself independent of your family and kind of forging your own way.
So knowing the schedule of publishing, and for those of you watching, publishing is it takes a lot longer than any of you think if you're not in it. And so for example, if a book comes out today, it probably sold about 2 years ago. And that means if the author didn't sell it on proposal or partial, it's possible they started writing it 3, 4, 5 years before today, maybe even longer. So one interesting thing right now is that people are putting out books into a world that looks very different from the world they started writing this book in. And also, depending on your publishing schedule, you probably spent some of the pandemic time finishing your book, working on promo for your book, thinking about your book.
Yes.
What was that experience like? Like what were you doing? Were you doing any edits during the pandemic? Were you sort of like had put it to rest completely, but then had to start thinking about what it was going to be like in this new different world?
Well, interestingly, I actually received my editorial letter. It was, I mean, I think it was, gosh, I'm trying to remember when my editor sent it. It was probably maybe 2 or 3 weeks before the pandemic. And so when I actually had that edit letter, I worked for a few weeks and I was kind of trucking right along. The larger changes I knew were going to need to come toward the end because we made so many big changes to the story and they made it so much stronger and I think so much more engaging and better. But I happened
editors
to
know what they're doing.
What's that?
I said editors know what they're doing.
Oh gosh, yes. Thankfully, because if it were up to me, like you guys might be falling asleep while reading my book. So I'm very thankful to Emily Easton. But I actually ended up, I guess it was probably mid-March, I ended up one of the earlier cases of COVID. And because I have some pre-existing health conditions, I have MS, I have asthma, and I ended up with a terrible, terrible case of COVID. And I have honestly never been so sick. And it was so hard. But, and on top of that, I was suffering from horrible writer's block because I mean, I could barely sit up. I was struggling to breathe. I'm trying to get this done. And in some ways, this book was such a lifeline for me because it gave me sort of that focus to be able to, like, somebody needed me, somebody was depending on me for something. And that just speaks to the honor in me of loyalty and duty and all of that stuff. So that really did help me. But as I was facing that very, like, my own black moment where I'm like, I don't know what my life is going to look like on the other side of this with the lung issues and everything else. I ended up having to leave my job of 22 years that I loved. There were so many changes. My main character had just faced her black moment and she's sitting here with like literally her life in shambles and not knowing what does that next step look like. And so to have sort of that mirrored moment with my own character was such a powerful thing. And it kind of hit me in an epiphany where it was like, I basically told myself the thing that I needed to hear about what it meant to embrace the unknown and to try to find a way to be okay with that. And so it was pretty cool. So then when I had that epiphany and that realization and told myself that thing that I most needed to hear, that was what became the new ending to the book. And that became the final line of the book.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I've talked to so many people about their books that came out in the, mid-pandemic times like now, which aren't exactly post-pandemic, but obviously post the worst of it for us.
Yes.
There's so many things in it that we wrote previously that were not about it, but ended up being about it somehow. It's fascinating. But I'm also like excited to see all the books that people wrote during the pandemic, but not about the pandemic, and all the ways it's like going to come out in those too.
Yeah. I think it will. I totally agree, Amy. I think it's going to be so interesting to kind of unpack all that, because I think there's so many things about the pandemic that we've come to appreciate in ways that we never could have had we not been through this and had we not been separated. And I actually got to have an in-person launch party outside safely. This was this past Friday. And I'll tell you what, like just getting to be around people for the first time that way and getting to talk to people like that, that connection was something I didn't even realize how deeply I needed it until I had it. And I kind of wanted to cry, but I managed to hold it together, which is pretty amazing because I tend to be a crier. So.
Yeah, I was out with friends for brunch yesterday and they toasted to a book deal I signed a couple of months ago. And it was like, oh, right. Normally I would have done that night. I would have gotten the offer.
Right.
I would have like called some people, we would have gone out, and I hadn't gotten to do that for months. So it was lovely. But like, yeah, it's, what's interesting is like, that's a thing that I've missed. I've missed that connection. I've missed those in-person events. I love doing an event like this with you because you and I don't live in the same city. We couldn't have done this otherwise. But at the same time, there's something just so nice about being at your local hometown bookstore, seeing your friends and family and coworkers, like people in person. It's something I miss for sure. But one interesting thing I've also been talking about with people now that we're all hanging out in person again and having conversations is for writers, our lives didn't change in some ways as much as other people's, because a lot of being a writer is staying in a room, you and your laptop, just trying to get the words out, trying to make them make sense, trying to find a story, trying to hit your word count, trying to take your edits like into, make them work, even if your editor gave you things that scare you, all that. It's very solitary, isolating work. To me, it's one of the harder parts of being a writer. And so it was this weird thing where I'm like, well, this pandemic's terrible, but my whole life's been leading to sitting alone in a room and working quietly.
But I think it's the difference between making the choice to do that and then having that choice taken away, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And also not having the threat of death and watching people suffer. That does not lend to great creative work from me.
No. I don't think it did for any of us. I mean, it was just, but it is interesting because in some ways too, like I have, I'm very good friends with, author Pintip Dunn, who is amazing. And we usually talk, we talk pretty much every single day, and we would do like check-ins every few hours and see how we're doing. So like, to some degree, I so miss the in-person, but I still felt like I had that tether to that personal connection. And I don't know where I would have been if I hadn't had my friends like Pintip and Marisa, our mutual friend Marisa, and so many.
Buy all the books she's written; they're all great.
Yes, and Lori Elizabeth Flynn, and I wish I knew who all was here so I could call you out, but there were just
so many people. All, but I promise we love you all.
We do equally.
So speaking of our audience and the people out there, I'm sure there are some aspiring writers out there or sort of beginning writers who are trying to like get further in their, I don't just want to say their careers, but level up their work, get better. You've now published 2 books. Obviously, there's going to be more books to come. What are some of the things about writing you've learned since doing this professionally that you sort of wish you could go back in time, and when you were like younger and less seasoned and struggling, you could be like, just do this one thing. I personally was never an outliner. I hated outlining. And then I started making myself. And now I don't struggle with plot. And now I don't, my revisions before it goes to my editor are much easier, I should say. So
Yes.
that is the thing I would try to like coax younger Amy into. Do you have things that you wish you could sort of like revisit?
You know, I mean, some of it is a little bit more focused on being published itself. And so for me, I would say the one of the biggest lessons that I learned is that once you have a book out in the world, it's no longer yours. It's really, people are going to be reading it and interpreting it through the lens of their own personal experience. And so in some ways, knowing that and having written a book where I have so many personal intersections with, that's made it, oh, there goes.
I'm sorry. I was like, I'm not listening to you now. There's a cat. I'm just gonna
I know, that's Cito. She was laying quietly on the floor, and I guess she got bored of us. But
I can't believe my cat, when he gets like jealous that I'm hanging out with someone, it's not him. He does jump sometimes.
she may skulk back in, who knows. But yeah, so that kind of made the stakes even a little bit more intense with this story. But otherwise, I think so much of it for me too has been learning that each book presents its own, not only challenges, but sometimes I think you can't always superimpose, or at least I can't anyway. Maybe you can, Amy. I mean, you're amazing and you have written a lot more books than me, but I can't always superimpose the same structure and the same sort of approach that I did with the previous book. Like every book sort of pulls something different.
Each book for the first time. You've written a book before, but like you hadn't written Smoke before. You had to learn how to write Smoke.
Yeah, and it's a different style. It's a totally different book.
And I think for some reason, like we're all like, oh, well, I've written a book and it got published. So like I've done a thing. I should know how to write a book now. And then you sit down, and if you try to do the exact same thing, it's like each book has to sort of, I think you can learn ways to make the process better, but it's never going to work the same way twice.
Yes. And I love, I talked about this before, but Pintip introduced me to pacemaker.press, which I'm sometimes not great about sticking to word count goals. I tend to edit as I go. And that's something I haven't been able to change for myself, but that's a great one because it really helps you to set goals, whether that's by word count, page count. You can actually build up to higher amounts per session, or, I mean, you can totally structure it and personalize it. And I love getting bursts of confetti whenever I meet my goals because I'm a confetti girl. So, the more the better.
I mean, it sounds satisfying. I think it's also important for people to hear that, for example, because I mean, Twitter has its issues. I still like it sometimes, but I just noticed there are pieces of writing advice that get shared around that become sort of like, oh, you have to do this. And I'm like, yes, if you can write every day and that works for you, that's awesome. If you personally do best when you set a word count goal and you try to hit it every day, great for you.
Yes.
You may be someone who just needs to make a goal that's for 30 minutes, I try to write every day. And no matter if I do or don't, it's fine. Or like, I mean, I've told people at the beginning, sometimes just opening the document is scary. If you can open the document and look at it, that counts as working today. If it was hard to do, like whatever works for you. And so I think it's good for people to hear that, like your focus is not word count.
Yeah, it really, it just depends on where I'm at in the process. And I think that everybody's process is different. And I really struggle with any sort of advice that says, this is what you need to do, because I feel like we're all wired so differently, and creatively, like where you're at in that process can also change. And I just think you have to find the ways to keep yourself motivated. And if that means, again, a smaller word count goal, or like saying, like I would actually take a favorite line from a chapter I'd written, even as a draft, and create a graphic, because like I like the artistry and sort of the creating those designs that way too. So I think, as you were saying, Amy, like there's a lot of ways to define writing where it's not necessarily always just fingers on the keyboard, pounding away, just banging your head against the wall. Like, I think sometimes you need to have those other ways to tap into the creativity.
Yeah. I have a very weird detailed spreadsheet about word count that I fill in, and I have an elaborate other spreadsheet that has the outline that I like color in the chapters as I complete them. So I can like look at it from afar and be like, oh, that's colored it. It's like, it's a good feeling watching it go from being like blank to being filled in. That works for me. A lot of people do not care about spreadsheets and do not find them inspirational. You should not use my method. So like, again,
Right.
whatever works for you. I think we're going to switch to audience Q&A now. Are you excited?
Yay.
Excited. It's going to be fun. So I do want to say, Darcy, that because you and Amy can't see the audience right now, there's been some audience comments. And so I just want to read those aloud because they're just lovely. And so you can sort of feel the energy in the room. Someone said, such a powerful story, Darcy. Thank you for sharing your author journey and the inspiration from your childhood with your dad. Yeah. And then another one said, love hearing about how this book came out, Darcy. It's such a great talk. Thank you for everything. So.
Oh, thank you. Love you guys.
Love, because, virtual, again, as Amy was saying earlier, we would never be able to get the two of you in the same room. And it's awesome to be able to do that.
I do love this.
Virtual. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. So we have our first question just popped up before I even had to ask, unprompted. Nicely done. So can't wait to read this, Darcy. It sounds amazing. What's next? Or are you taking a break? Because you're totally allowed to take a break.
Oh, I so appreciate that. I have actually kind of been in the midst of trying to figure out what I'm going to do next. As I sort of mentioned a little bit earlier, I was tinkering with a book that I absolutely loved. I was looking at making it YA. And I think we're starting to see a little bit of a theme in my writing, but it was basically kind of a Veronica Mars meets Peaky Blinders, but set in the Detroit sort of criminal underworld during Prohibition, and a female bootlegger, which I thought would be phenomenal.
Make a YA. That sounds amazing.
Can I has, please?
Can you guys find somebody to buy it and I'll write it?
Okay.
But no, so that was something that I was toying with, and we actually own a Model T. So we're in the 20s world. We have a whole gang of Model Ts. It's really fun. I sometimes try to post like stuff like that about riding around in the T, and it's cool. Her name is Tess, for the record. Yeah. So, but I'm also like, there's a part of me that also really kind of misses my rom-com roots. That's where I really cut my teeth. And I love, love, love banter. And the more ridiculous, the better. Like the opening of Summer of Supernovas features an opening scene with a thong flash and a water tower fall and like all kinds of nuttiness. So I kind of like it would be fun to do that. And I'm considering a pivot to adult and maybe looking at doing like an adult rom-com. So I'm taking some time to read and get inspired and see where my imagination takes me.
Absolutely. No, that's great. And I mean, adult rom-com is very hot right now.
That was the book I just sold.
I'm so excited for it. It sounds amazing. I can't wait for it.
So excited.
2023 is far away, but it won't seem like it, I'm sure. It'll go by fast.
When is it coming out, Amy?
February 2023. So we have
okay. Yeah, but I blink.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I want to say that I love the publishing insight that you guys are talking about and the honesty that comes out of that that writing a book doesn't have to be this mysterious, secretive thing. But I want to ask, why books? Why are those your medium? I'm serious. It's a serious question because, there's screenplays and movies, what draws you to novel writing specifically as a medium? And I think both of you, this would be a really interesting question to hear, just how creative the pair of you are, especially when, Darcy, you're talking about design and, I think that there's creativity in spreadsheets that maybe it's just me and Amy in the world who think that, but what draws you to books as a medium for storytelling and for art?
Well, for me, I would say, I think and anybody that's read anything I've written, I tend to write very character-driven stuff. Mm-hmm. So for me, it's about getting into the skin of the characters. And I love all the nuance of the things that they do that I don't feel like I could ever explore or do the kind of justice to that I personally would want to, and that I find fulfilling as a writer if I were doing like that within a screenplay or something. So really for me, it truly, like, it always keeps circling back to the characters and just wanting to get to know them better and see what gets revealed. And again, it's the nuance that I really, really love.
How about for
For
you,
me,
Amy?
growing up, books were everything to me. I loved books so much.
Mhm.
Like when I think of how much I connected with like the Betsy Tacy series or the Babysitter's Club, I just wanted
Yes.
to do something like that. And so that was just always the goal. And I think because of that, my ideas just are like in book format almost. So when like people will say like, "Oh my gosh, how do you write a book? It's so long." I'm like, well, my ideas are book length. Like I don't it's not a challenge to me. That's just like how my brain is programmed. But I think it's programmed because I grew up on books. I grew up on being like, I want to do this. As soon as I realized that like people were doing it, I was like, I want to be one of those people. So, obviously I love music, I love television, I love theater, but books were the thing that were like in my home and like in my bed with me and like a book is so personal too when you read it. It's just you in the book, and it's all I wanted. And I mean, I just feel so lucky that that was the thing I wanted, and now I get to do that, and I get to be like a book maybe someone has in their bed with them. It's like just them in that book. So
And
yeah, it
it
was never a question.
transports too, right? Like that was another thing for me too, growing up. When things weren't always easy, it was like I could slip into the Nancy Drew case files and solve some crimes. And, truly I grew up believing the worst thing that could happen to me was I had a fear of chloroform. And so,
I was afraid of
so
diabetes because of Stacey McGill. There.
so it is, but yes, that's such a great point. Yeah, it is like so much of how I think a lot of authors grew up with just such an innate love of books.
Yeah. No, it's true. It's almost like it's in our blood and it's like infused into who we are. And it's so very, very true because, I don't know a single writer that isn't a reader at their core. And I love asking that question here. Here's another good one that we have. Has there been any controversy surrounding the book that you found so far? And what do you usually say to those who try and tear you down for it?
I don't know that I can really say there's been any major controversy that I've been aware of. I would say one thing, and this was part of why I wanted the author's note in there, is again, Amy referenced how the world really changes so much from the time you begin writing a story, even once you've made it through the entire editorial process. And so for me, this story was never about criminal justice itself and the brokenness of our system, because there just wasn't room in this story, as Amy mentioned. Like there's so many different things going on, and truly at its core it was about this family. But that was something that I do think books like that are so important, and really looking at the deep needed changes with the disparity, particularly among race and things like that. So I mean, but beyond that, again, I haven't really heard a whole lot. It hasn't been out very long. But I'm hopeful that the topic itself isn't a deterrent for people, because again, I didn't write this book to be controversial. And I think sometimes when people see that immediate topic in the cover, there can be that misperception of things. But the reality is it's not about the controversy. I want to have conversations. Like there's a lot of things to discuss in the novel.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing, is that it's not, pot seems to be the big thing that comes from this book, but there's so many layers that you all have discussed and talked about, and the fact that it is so character driven. And
Yes.
but that's part of the reason I wanted to ask about books, because to me I don't know, I saw this book as like a movie or a play or something, because you have such a wonderful grasp on character motivation and making us feel empathy for them. And so that's really what this book is about at the end of the day. The last question that I want to ask here is our favorite at Tattered Cover, where we end our series when we talk about this. And it's for both of you. For Amy, you as a reader of this book, and for Darcy, you as the writer of this book. But what did this book, Smoke, teach you? And I'd love Amy to start.
Ooh.
And then we can end with our author of the hour here.
One thing that I thought was we didn't get to it because, there's only so much time and there's so many questions. But I really liked it being about someone who had been in a big city and was in a small town now and really liked the small townness of it, and not in a oh, cities are stupid, I hate them, but just in a no, this is where I belong, this is where I feel a connection. And I thought that was a really important thing because I am the opposite myself, and I love a big city and I love a big crowd, but I loved seeing a character embrace that in such a non-negative way, just a beautiful, like, here's where I found myself, I want to stay here. And I thought, I like feeling a character who has a connection of what means home to them, what means their future.
I like that too.
Thank you. Thank you. For me, I think the interesting thing with writing this book is I feel like I took away from it. It brought me closer to my father, honestly. It's hard because emotions were not always something that either of us were good at communicating, and so I just feel like, so there was actually a write-up in the local paper that was on the front page, and he opened up about what it was like being in Vietnam and everything else. And I think there were times in my life when I wished, well, why can't I just have this relationship that I see all my friends have with their family? But this is kind of, mine looks different than that. And I'm not saying it's bad, but you just compare. And so I think when you begin to just love and accept people for who they are and where they're at, and you understand the wounds that are behind that and how sometimes those events in our lives can shape us, then you just have a whole other appreciation for that person and what they've been through. So for me, that was probably one of the most valuable and also personal things that I took away from the story, and one of my favorite things. That, and I grew up very much feeling like, even though it was never placed on my shoulders, the weight of the world, but I really realized in writing this book and in connecting with the main character herself, that the weight of the world was never yours to carry. And I think that there's a lot of teens that could really benefit from hearing that, because the pressure has just intensified so much, I think, with social media and with just the pace of everything. So yeah.
No, I think that's wonderful. And thank you for the honesty, and thank you for the vulnerability from both of you, in this conversation and in your stories that you gift us with. We're so excited to be celebrating Smoke. And you can get your copies at tattercover.com or at any one of our locations. And I know because I ordered them and I put them on the shelf. Thank you all so much for this. I want to give Darcy and Amy, both of you, a chance to remind people who you are, where they can find you online, and anything else you want to say before we close out this evening. Amy, again, I'll have you start, and we'll end with Darcy Woods, author of Smoke.
Great. I'm Amy Spalding. My most recent 2 books are Summer of Jordi Perez and The Best Burger in Los Angeles, and We Used to Be Friends. This is about a friendship breakup. So these are also, this is Pride Month. These are both queer books and voices. Support queer authors. We need you all. That's me. I'm on social media. I'm very easy to find. You'll find me.
She's very easy to find.
I would just reiterate everything that Amy said, and that I personally helped curate the list that is on tatteredcover.com right now, and I'm very proud of it. And you definitely need to go check them out. And Amy's books are on there, and you should just go read more.
Buy them all, every single one.
Multiples. Give them to your friends.
Yeah,
why stop at one?
Exactly. Buy in bulk. You get free shipping over certain price ranges here at Tattered. Do it.
And I'd be delighted if you bought a bonanza of my books as well. Again, I'm Darcy Woods, author of Smoke and Summer of Supernovas. You can find me at darcywoods.com. I tend to be most on Instagram if I'm going to be on any platform. So I'm at Woods Writes. So you can find me there. And yeah, that is me.
You need to buy Smoke as well. It is worth every page, and it's not just about the pot. And I love that that's the hook for it, but at the same time, there is so much more heart in this book. And
it's also a beautiful cover. Like, it'll look nice on itself. Like an Instagram influencer aesthetic type.
I feel like it's like the anthropology of pop book covers. Like I would love to see it in every anthropology store. If anybody knows a connection to anthropology, please forward them my way. Got a lovely book for you.
Your cover is gorgeous. They did a wonderful job with that, I will say.
Really quick,
I was talking about your book Smoke, and that you can get it online at tatteredcover.com in all of its beautiful glory. And there's nothing more Instagrammable than the real book. Let's be real. It's not the same as an ebook, but we really appreciate your business and your time and your support. Local businesses and local independent bookstores, and specifically, would not be here without you, especially during this particular time of year where a particular online seller likes to try and push all their sales. We really appreciate you not boxing us out. Thank you for being a support. Darcy, Amy, I'm going to ask you to stick around while I finish this up here. This has been celebrating the release of Smoke with Darcy Woods in conversation with Amy Spalding. We thank you all so much. Stay safe, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
And we're out.